ask a random person what they see here, and most of the time they'll say bullets. In reality, these are cartridges. The bullet rests on top of the shell and makes up the projectile. The word bullet is incorrectly used interchangeably with cartridge, and I happen to mix up the terminology from time to time, so please bear with me when you hear me slip up. My wife bought me this. I showed it to my father-in-law the very next day. He handed me a 20, and he said, go buy some bullets. Now, he didn't mean go buy a bunch of these. He meant go buy some of these. These are bullets. These are what are sent out of the gun's muzzle after the trigger is pulled. Not this. The bullet is sent in a shell casing, whether it be brass, steel, or zinc, and after the casing is filled with the appropriate amount of gunpowder. And at the bottom is the primer, which could be center fire or rim fire. Once the firing pin strikes or pinches the primer, the powder is ignited and sends the bullet down and out the barrel. David is going to help us understand better the composition of a cartridge. Go on, David.
After a round is fired, regardless of whether it's a rifle cartridge or a pistol cartridge, you'll usually pick that up off the ground. That's a spent 9mm case with obviously the primer anvil's been hit, so that's a spent round. Yeah. So we're going to reuse this cartridge and we're going to reuse this shell and load a new round of ammunition in it. So follow me along and I'll show you the steps that we go through to do that.
Okay.
First, we're going to deprime the spent primer. I've got a Lee decapping die here. We're going to push out that spent primer. It's going to fall into the primer drop tube. This is the standard single stage reloaders. So now that that cartridge has been spent, we have vacancy for a new primer to seat. So we're going to seat the cartridge in once again. And we're going to take a primer. This is a small pistol primer. Very, very small. We're going to load that into the priming arm. We're actually going to return this. The steps at which you would do this would vary from manufacturer, but this is how you do it on most single-stage presses. And then it seats a new primer that's ready for powder and a projectile.
Notice too that there's no dent in there.
Yep.
So which I will elaborate here in just a little bit.
Then we're going to remove the decap. Turn this to the bottom of a stroke. I've got we're going to load that into here. We placed back into the die. Then what we're going to do is we're going to seat the new bullet. We need a seating. The depths at which you would seat these bullets into the brass will depend on the bullet weight, the load type. Whether you're going subsonic, you'll seat those bullets. If you're going supersonic, this is a 115 grain full metal jacket plated by Berry's. This will be a supersonic cartridge, so this will be loaded to this cartridge will seat. You'll place the bullet into the cartridge. And there you have a fully reloaded 9mm Luger.
This is not a tutorial. Please do not try this at home. We only do this so you can understand the composition better. So thanks, David.
Not a problem.
Now earlier you heard me mention rimfire, and I want to elaborate on that a little bit. What that means is, as the firing pin strikes the edge of the bullet, that's when the powder is ignited and sends the bullet flying down the barrel. As you can see by that dent in there, there we go. As you can see by that dent in there, that this is a spent casing, and it's also pretty obvious by the fact that there's no bullet there. Now just for contrast, you can see that this 22 LR still has its bullet. It has not yet been fired. And notice how it has no dent, like this one does. Now most modern day cartridges are center fire, which means the firing pin strikes the center of the bullet, or the primer. So you could see this circle here in the center indicates it's a center fire. Notice here how this one has a dent in the middle. unlike this one. And again, it's obvious that this is a spent casing because it's missing its bullet. Now this is an old example of a rimfire that is really hard to find these days. Most rimfires today are 22 LR. They're certainly not as common as they used to be. As you could see, there's no. Wish the camera would focus here. Yeah, but as you can see, there's no primer in the center. But a hammer would just squeeze the rim just like that in a modern day 22 LR and just set off the round. It's definitely bigger than a 22 LR. You can see for yourself a 25 Stevens long cannot. Sorry that this is very. There we go. And there are just a vast variety of different shaped cartridges. Like some of them here you can see have a rimmed bottom, which means the rim is wider than the cartridge wall. And then there are some that are rimless, where the very bottom of the rim is either flush with the cartridge wall or just slightly smaller. And there are some that are straight up and down, like the 357 Magnum here. And then there are those that are shaped like a bottleneck, like the 3030 and the 308 here. There are others also, and they're used for different kinds of hunting or self-defense, whatever the case may be. But different ones are more ideal for close range, while others are more ideal for long range. I mentioned earlier, I said that some bullets or cartridges are made for very specific purposes, and a lot of those purposes can depend on close range or long range. Like some are designed very specifically for closer range, while others can go farther out. But just to be safe, never ever underestimate the power or the distance of any kind of cartridge, because even something as small as the 22 LR can be deadly as far as a mile. When it comes to the so many different sizes, they range from as puny as the 22 short all the way to the massive 50 BMG. Notable comparison. And speaking of caliber, the way on how a lot of the bullets are measured is by their diameter. For example, there's the 9mm, which in the metric system has a diameter of 9mm, and then the 357 Magnum has a measurement of 0.357 of an inch. But not every single caliber, though, is named after their diameter. For example, the 44 Magnum is not a 44 caliber. I believe its actual diameter measurement is 0.429 of an inch. And there are also different shapes of the bullet themselves, or different kind of configurations. For example, there's a soft tip right here. There's also a polymer tip. And there's also hollow point, which is also a soft tip. This particular one is a 41 Remington, or Magnum rather. And there's also a round nose like this Full Metal Jacket 9mm.
These are two 224, 55 grain, and 62 grain projectiles. These almost look identical. One is a lead core, one is a steel core. Steel core is obviously magnetic. This is a standard 5.56 NATO configuration cartridge. This is intended to be a green tip, air quotes, or something sort of armor penetrating, whereas this is a full lead core that will usually mushroom on any armored targets. Whereas these have a steel penetrator in the middle that will usually continue flying through the ballistic target in the sense of better penetration.
And a lot of cartridges, too, are very much so associated with certain kinds of guns. But they're not exclusive to those kinds of guns. But like I said, they're mostly associated with them. So every time you hear something like this 357 Magnum, for example, they're mostly associated with revolvers. But there are some carbines, like the 1894 Marlin lever action, that is chambered in the 357 Magnum. Another example is the 7.62 by 39, which is mostly associated with the AK-47 and SKS, but there are bolt-action hunting rifles chambered in this round. Now, as mentioned earlier, the casing that make up cartridges can either be brass or steel, and they can also be zinc-plated. If you ever wanted to reload, you can reload from brass, and I believe you can also reload from the zinc-plated, but not from the steel. Cartridges are also weighed in different grains. Now, as you can see here, I have two different boxes of 30-30 Winchester, and there are different grains. There's 170 grain, 160 grain. Now, what grain means is the weight of the caliber. Now, the lower the grain number, the faster it's going to travel. Now, the higher the grain number, though, it's going to hit even harder. Let's take a closer look at these 30-30s. Okay. Now, on the left is the Federal 170 grain 30-30, and on the right is the Hornady 160 grain. Now, both the same cartridges, but different configurations. They have different ballistics. Now, you could chamber them in the same firearm, but depending on the firearm, they will have completely different ballistics and different performances. It's also just another example in how there are different variations of the same kind of caliber out there. Different calibers come and go in popularity as time goes by, but some, like the
30-06.
stand the test of time and will not be going anywhere anytime soon. Some calibers, like the 300 Savage, have declined in popularity as time has gone by, while others, like the 224 Valkyrie, are pretty new, and new ones are being designed and thought up all the time. 22 LR is one of the most popular, if not the most popular, round in the world. It's also the 22 Short, and the much more powerful 22 Win Mag. All of these are rimfire, and another rimfire is the 17 Hornady, which is a little bit more modern. The most common rimfire, though, is the 22 LR, or 22 long rifle. The calibers that you see here were more popular as long as a century ago, but they are a little more harder to come by these days, and some of these also are on the more obscure side, where you might find them in different countries such as Europe. These old vintage ammo boxes tell the story of what calibers were available way back in the day, and a lot of these are not as readily available, but others, like the 270 and the 30-06, are implied in these vintage boxes that they've been around for a very long time, and those two are still going strong. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Stay safe and take care of yourselves.